Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, Robert, we might have you frozen. Okay. Well, we'll get started anyway because we're recording now, and hopefully Robert will be back in. Welcome to Age of Geek, everybody. I'm Jake. Robert is joining us hopefully shortly, and we have special guest with us, Quinn Rollins. Quinn, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Oh, I think we just got a message. Let's see what Robert said here. Uh-oh. Okay. Well, Robert's having some technical difficulties. I'm sure he'll be back in. But we'll just go. The show, as they say in show business, must go on. And while we're not big time show business, we are very small time show business. So we will find a way to carry on until Robert rejoins us here shortly. But Quinn, we are talking about Star Trek, and as far as I know, you're a pretty big Star Trek fan. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. Going back to the 80s, I guess. Big fan of the movies that were out then, and then when Next Generation came on, I started watching that with my family when I was a kid, and then Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and then Enterprise, meh, and then the like new Star Trek, like 21st century Star Trek, has been great. So
Yeah.
big fan. Deep Space Nine, I usually say is my favorite track. So
Usually say. Other times, like if you need to in a pinch, you'll say it's another one just in case, like depending on the audience.
well, so one of my friends, when they ask him about what's your favorite like Star Wars, it's like whatever
Hmm.
Star Wars I'm watching, and I feel the same way about Star Trek. It's like
Yeah,
whichever one is on TV that I'm watching right now, that's my favorite.
that's pretty fair. Yeah, I've been impressed so far with what they've done with the new Star Trek that's come out. Discovery's pretty solid. That's a very controversial
Hmm.
opinion to have and divisive, but I still feel like it's the truth, and that's fine. And I've Picard, I'm split on. I did not care for the first season as much. The second was a little bit better, and I'm enjoying the third. You laugh. I'm nervous.
No, I agree. I think Discovery,
Okay.
when it's at its best, is among the best Star Trek has to offer. And Picard, I don't feel like has hit those heights yet. I
Right.
I love Patrick Stewart of Captain Picard. I feel like seeing more of the Next Generation reunion that we're getting
Hmm.
so far in three of Picard is more what I hoped for. I want to see
Yeah.
these characters have grown and changed, and we're getting some good stuff.
Yeah. I agree. How about Strange New Worlds? What are your thoughts on that one?
Oh, I love it so much. It's I I love it. I feel like it's sometimes I think our memories of old TV shows are better than they actually are. I feel like
Yes.
Strange New Worlds is like if I were remembering how good the 1960s Star Trek was in my, teenage head and like reading books and stuff, these adventures that I knew were bigger than the 60s could show me on their budget and technology. I feel like
Hmm.
Strange New Worlds is more like that.
Yeah. Like what? Yeah, that kind of rose-colored glass looking back on it. This is what Star Trek was, and um, I Pike has quickly become one of my favorite captains. Like I watch the show and I think,
I
yeah, I wouldn't mind being on his crew.
I I just like to look at his hair. Like I think I would just have little emoji eyes staring at his hair constantly because it's beautiful hair.
Yeah, he does
But
have
but
amazing hair.
but also the right kind of optimism, the right kind of I want to have an adventure, but I don't want to put my crew in danger. and then having
Hmm.
that element of he knows what his future is going to be, but doesn't know everything about it. I feel like it makes for a compelling character and an interesting take on Captain Pike, who has always been sort of a oh that guy.
Yeah, yeah, he was the guy before Kirk. Showed up in
Right.
one pilot episode,
Yeah.
and that was it. And that's
Yeah.
all we really knew about him. So
Yeah.
it's great to see the character kind of get fleshed out, like you said. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. That's probably out of the new Star Trek series, that one's probably become my favorite, even after just one season. But any show that can hook me in after just one season, it's pretty good. I'm usually pretty forgiving, especially with Star
Yeah.
Trek.
I uh I love Strange New Worlds, and then there's Lower Decks is the other, and I think it hits the right mix of adventure and comedy. And is this something I wanted from Star Trek? And it turns out, yes, it is.
If you had asked me before it came out, I'd probably say no. But yeah, now that we have it, it
Oh
definitely
yeah,
it's filling a niche that was needed. So yeah. Well, we're killing time until Robert comes back. He says he's about just a few minutes away, so he'll be back in, and he'll direct our
all right.
conversation as far as DS9, which I agree that is when I talk about Star Trek, that's my favorite series as well. And uh, usually, if I'm going to go back and rewatch a series, like I'll go back and pick and choose different episodes in Next Generation that I really
Yeah,
enjoy, but I don't know that I would sit down and watch the whole series from start to finish, especially because the first couple of seasons are just really painful to get through. But
yeah,
with DS9, that's one that I'll start just regularly at the very beginning and watch through to the end because I just enjoy the series so much and the storytelling in it. And it's a little different because it's still episodic at parts, but it has an overarching story that connects it from start to finish, kind of like Next Generation tried to do with All Good Things, but didn't really touch
yeah.
on it most of the time in the series.
Right. Well, and it was only with All Good Things that they could go back and say, "Oh, this was the arc
Hmm.
of our story of Picard and Q's relationship and all that." It's like retroactively they sort of tried to make that happen, but and they were under the limits of syndication and
Right.
what Paramount would allow and not allow, and uh, but I it's definitely Deep Space Nine's definitely a step up in storytelling from what Next Generation was able to do.
Yeah. I feel like with Deep Space Nine, when it came out, it didn't catch on right away, and I still don't know that it ever hit the heights as far as viewership that Next Generation did. But
Right.
I think that helped it because the storytellers, the writers kind of felt like nobody's really watching this anyway. So let's just tell the stories that we want to tell because what's the
Take more
worst that could happen?
chances.
Yeah. And I think that comes through in a lot of the storytelling in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah,
I've got
it's
kids
when being
kids
the
in here.
middle child is an advantage.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, uh, yeah, and a lot of people, that's kind of their main issue with Deep Space Nine is it doesn't feel like Star Trek to them, which is crazy because I don't know what Star Trek is supposed to feel like, except that if you tell me it's a Star Trek
Right.
series and it should feel like Star Trek, right? But that's kind of the
Yeah.
complaint, right? That they're not out exploring space. They're kind of just sitting around at the station doing nothing, which isn't true either. But
I think if you just hopped into the middle at some point and you didn't know the story, it would be possibly harder to get into than a single episode of Next Generation or something else. But you you still have those stories. You still have the characters. I mean, it's still, oh, those people are Starfleet, those people aren't Starfleet. It's Star Trek. Like,
mhm.
catch up.
Yeah, totally agree. Um, so, and it does hit its 30th anniversary this year or earlier this year. I think it aired in January or February of 1993 is when it first aired. And that, like, going back and watching it, I still, so when somebody says old Star Trek to me, I think of the 1960s series, and when somebody says new Star Trek, I think of
Right.
Next Generation and later.
Right.
And this is when I've realized I've started to become an old man, because I'm like, no, that's still new Star Trek, and it's hitting its 30th anniversary. And my kids are like, no, that's a really old show now, Dad.
Yeah,
So
I know. Yeah, yeah, aging. It's yeah. No, when Deep Space Nine premiered, I was living in Germany and not consuming media,
mhm,
uh, and found a found a paperback of the Emissary, the first episode, and so I read
right.
that in German before I ever got the chance to actually see the TV show,
Oh,
and
interesting.
it was a different world,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Uh, I I missed, during a similar time living in Germany, not consuming media, I missed Star Wars: Attack of the Clones, Spider-Man, and, the first Lord of the Rings movie. So, that was all stuff that came out while I was living in Germany, and,
yeah.
I feel like I dodged a bullet with Attack of the Clones. That one I was okay missing.
I I missed Jurassic Park and Lion King, so, like,
Wow.
all of '93, all of '94, but
Yeah.
yeah.
We were able to catch, Emperor's New Groove in German while I was there. That was the animated film I missed, which is not the same as Lion King.
No,
Not quite
no,
the same level.
that's fascinating.
Uh, so reading it in German, what were your thoughts with Emissary reading that paperback? Because that's a totally different experience, I'm sure.
Uh, I loved it. I was looking for ways to stretch my language learning and,
Mhm.
like, find new things, and, I was encouraged to do it, and so I
That's
did.
cool.
They also had, Hörspiele, so little cassettes of basically the German dubbing of different TV shows, and, had those for about a dozen Next Generation episodes from season
Oh,
1,
cool. Oh, well,
and
that's too bad.
it was weird. I know, it was not the best.
I I am probably a lot harsher on season 1 of The Next Generation than I should be, because season 2 is much worse, but, for me, once their uniforms aren't as tight, that's usually when this show is getting better. And
When the
Riker's beard
actors
is
can
grown in.
breathe, yeah,
Yeah,
when the actors can
yeah,
breathe, they can tell better stories.
yeah. I do feel like with DS9 though, as it has gone on, as it's aged over the last 30 years, it's picked up more of a following. And I think a lot of that we talked about how the storytelling was a little bit different, and we'll get more into detail on this because I think Robert's got like a killer outline and everything.
Yeah,
And clearly, I am not as well prepared for the outline part of this as he is. But I think we talked about the difference in the storytelling. Do you feel like Deep Space Nine is more similar to the type of storytelling that we see today on series, and that's why it's starting to pick up more of a cult following, or has in the recent years? I don't know. What do you think? Is it similar to that, or still really different?
I think that kind of storytelling benefits from being on streaming services.
Mm,
So you don't have to CD or a tape or something. You can just keep on watching while you're doing laundry or whatever else you're doing, and I think it benefits benefits from streaming services.
Robert, were you wearing the uniform before you froze and dropped out?
Yes.
And I just didn't notice. This is wow.
I
Well,
also didn't notice. So
So I had the tunic on, the undershirt on under my hoodie, and changed it. And literally, I had just sat back down for putting it on, and my computer decides to go, guess what you're not about to do? And I'm like, what? It's like, anything. I'm like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. So basically, it's just like being on Deep Space Nine in the early seasons when Chief O'Brien's got to chase all the problems down.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I did a terrible job filling in for you over the last few minutes while you were gone.
I'm sure
Uh,
that you did just fine.
no, I don't know.
You
Quinn
did great.
carried it. He just answered my questions. So
Well, I'm sorry that I missed it. And also let's see if it possibly captured it before it decided to die. Uh, in dying, it also took down the notes that I had that I was going to use for this. So we're going to see if it did not save them. Fortunately, I
oh,
took a picture of it before the computer decided to go completely dead.
well, the good news is, Robert, I did not spend about 2 minutes ago a few seconds talking about how well prepared you were and how great your outline probably was for this. So and built that up for everybody.
Well, thank you. No pressure there at all now. Um, so not knowing what you two talked about for the past 10 minutes, I'm going to say, let's start with what made Deep Space Nine so different from the other treks. And for me, it was not only the first series that started with a lead character who was A, not a captain, but B, also a person of color. We'd seen other races and other genders in the lead role before. We'd never seen a series that started with, well, this guy's not a captain to begin with, and it's a family man, person of color, so many different things, and he was also damaged in a way that we've never really seen before that fleshed out in a captain or in a lead. All of the other leads were pretty straightforward, knew what they were doing, knew where they were going, and then you get this man who's really at a crossroads, not just in space, but also in his life.
Mhm.
So that was one of the big things for me is what made it different was it's not it's also not the bright shiny Star Trek that we'd been used to before that. It's not, the we're going boldly forward with Kirk. It's not the we've gone boldly forward, we're continuing to do that, but it's a lot brighter and shinier now that we're 75 years further down the road and we have bigger ships, we could do more things. And we've got androids now. But this is I remember it being affectionately referred to, or maybe not so affectionately referred to as gas station in space at one point. And I was like, wow, that's a way to identify it. But it kind of was, especially for the first couple of seasons.
Yeah, I I think yeah, Cisco is a totally different commanding officer from what we've seen previously, and I love the setup for his character. And now I'm a huge Picard fan, love Picard, but I love that in the first episode we basically have Cisco telling Picard off because in his mind Picard killed his wife, right?
Hmm.
And it doesn't take a lot of gymnastics to get to that. Uh,
No.
because I totally get where he's coming from. But I also love that in this first episode, and we talked about this, we hit on it very briefly. Everything we hit on, Robert, was very brief, I promise. But we hit on this very briefly that, Emissary, it sets up the story arc for the whole series.
Hmm.
Like it at the very beginning lets you know that this is going to build on itself. It's building a bigger story that's going to go over the whole existence of the series. And I think that was very different for Star Trek. I mean, other than the premise of, boldly going where no one has gone before, DS9 was the first one that really kind of set that up. This is what our story is going to be. It's
Hmm.
going to be about this wormhole. It's going to be about the prophets. It's going to be about, or the wormhole aliens, whatever you prefer to call them. Um, and I thought that was different. And I think it benefited from that.
I would agree. Um, something else. Watching Cisco's development over the series was something. I mean, Kirk was pretty across the board the same person throughout the series and even the movies. Um, Picard, I think that they gave him growth through adventures and other experiences, especially like the Inner Light, where he lived another lifetime in like 20 minutes, and it was
Mhm.
one of the more beautiful episodes of TNG, where it changed his perspective on so many things. They kept a through line there. But Cisco going from a man who had just lost his wife, had lost his wife about a year before. He's now a single father. He's not sure if he wants to stay in Starfleet. He's got the man who killed his wife telling him, here's your new job. And just all of these things coming together. And then if you add on top of that, the Bajorans are like, you're a top holy person. And he's just like, I want no part of this. And he fought it so vehemently for so long as well. And, then realized as the series progressed that it wasn't just something that they thought, it was, his destiny. It was who he truly was. And he was, the coming to accept that was a, huge thing for him, even begrudgingly. And, let's use that as a springboard into, this also did something that you didn't see often in other series. They kind of glanced off of it maybe for an episode or two, but religion played a central role in this series. And it wasn't just like, we're going to talk about it. It's like, it's right here in your face all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think previously, if religion comes up in Star Trek,
I think
at all. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Quinn.
Oh no! Please don't tell me you lost Quinn too. Oh, there he is.
Am I lost?
Nope,
No,
you
you're
were there.
here.
We can hear you. We got you.
I get it. The I think having so as reluctant to be a leader there in Starfleet, first of all, but then being able to having to make that choice. Do I accept this role as your religious leader now, on top of being stationed here on the station? That having him go from being a reluctant leader to being a true leader and accepting his it's a path that you can't 3 episodes or in 4 episodes. It's something that benefits from having 7 years to explore a character with other characters and relationships with hosts, that you don't get if you are able to leave your problems behind and go to the next planet next week. And Deep Space Nine allows them to do that.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm. And I think on the religion piece that you mentioned, Robert, it's interesting because I think up to that point in Star Trek, if religion came up, it was usually like on some backwards planet that they would come to that would have these really strong religious beliefs, and it was this feeling of we have all evolved kind of past that point of religion, and Deep Space Nine, here they are confronting this culture and this people in the Bajorans who are still deeply spiritual and deeply religious, despite having warp capability, despite being, part of this interplanetary kind of culture that's developed within the Federation, within the Quadrant. And not just the Bajoran culture and religion that we explore, but I think we get a little bit deeper into some of the Klingon religion, a little bit of the Cardassian, and it's not in a way that just dismisses it as, it finds a way to say that religion and science and progress could coexist on some level, which was different than what we had seen in Star Trek previously.
You mean hooky religions and ancient weapons aren't going to serve you as well as a good blaster at your side?
Yeah.
To
Well,
steal from somewhere else.
but even Han knew he was wrong because he says in The Force Awakens that it was all true anyway. So,
Well, and that's true. But I think that in getting
But it took
to
him
religion,
30 years to get there.
it did, and it took
yeah,
him the death of his son as well.
yeah, but that makes sense for his character. Actually, I
Yeah.
think Han Solo would take him 30 years to get to that point. So,
But something else that going into the religion, I mean, we got to see. You mentioned the Klingons, and let's use this as another jumping off point. Worf. We get a character who was kind of a fan favorite on the Next Generation, brought into Deep Space Nine, and it's kind of like we had Picard, we had the lead-in character for the previous series kicking off this series. So we saw Picard and we had our little handoff there. But then to go and get somebody as a tactical officer and to bring in Worf, it was like, well, they're showing that this is a connected universe and a connected timeline, and bringing in a character that had fan interest and fan buy-in. And I think that may have been part of the reasons. Like Deep Space Nine was not, I don't think it was appreciated nearly as much as it could have been when it first came out, because it wasn't the Trek that everybody was so used to.
Mm-hmm.
And in bringing in somebody, it's like, it's okay. It'll be all right. We got people you like. Look, you've got Chief O'Brien. He's still here. We're bringing in Worf, and they had that kind of relationship that they could interact together. And I think that moving to Deep Space Nine was one of the best things that ever happened for that character, because you see all the memes about Worf getting just chumped all the time on TNG, and then he comes to DS9. It's just like, oh no, he is a badass. Cool. This is what I want to see in a Klingon character. And they did a lot with Worf that they did character growth with him over the 7-year arc of TNG, but it wasn't his show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the flagship. It's everybody else, and oh yeah, we got a security guy over here who happens to have been raised by a Russian couple, which is kind of weird, but we'll just go with it. And they did a few things with his adoptive family. They did things showing how he was treated in the Klingon Empire, but here he got to really grow and have an actual relationship that they didn't just go, nope, she's going back to this guy with Jadzia. And it was really nice to see how that developed and the respect that they had for each other. And just watching that character's development as well was fun, because we got to see different sides of him that didn't really get to shine through in TNG.
Yeah. I think it was
I
definitely
actually,
oh,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Quinn.
Sorry, Jake.
No, you're good.
I resented Worf at first. I was like, if we have now 10 Worf stories per season, that means I'm going to know less about Odo and Kira and Jadzia and all these other characters. But I do think his addition enriched the stories of other characters, and I think they pushed Cisco especially to step up a little more, kind of emboldened some of those stories. And you had some other great Klingons like Martok and the other Klingons that we got to meet because of Worf and the Klingon focus. And I think to have more fun story, I I I resented it at first because I thought he would pull too much screen time, but I really like the stories they told with him. So
Yeah. And I think it definitely was a move by the creators and the showrunners to say, hey, we're not getting the viewership we want, so let's bring in this character that everybody knows and loves. And that can be a risky move because, like you said, Quinn, it could be that they're going to try to pull now more toward all Worf storylines. And I do appreciate that they didn't. Like, they still said, okay, we're going to add him to our list of characters here, but we're going to still tell the Deep Space Nine stories, and we're just going to tell Worf Deep Space Nine stories. And I think because you're grounded on this station and it's centered on life on the station, that's where you can get that personal development and that personal growth that we got from Worf, and especially in his relationship with Jadzia. And I mean, that's one of my favorite relationships in all of Star Trek, is the one that the two of them have, and the way it grows and the respect, like you said, Robert, that they have for each other is just it's just really cool. And we didn't get those kinds of Worf stories on the Next Generation, and his character just grew a ton. Um, Now I'm a big Worf fan in general, so and I did not resent when they brought him on the show. I was probably more bought into the show when he did join, so it probably worked for me. But I do appreciate now going back and revisiting the series multiple times how they treated his character after he joined. And Deep Space Nine, for their development and their story, they didn't need Worf, but Worf, for his character and his development, needed Deep Space Nine, and he needed the Cisco, and he needed the other characters on the show. And as far as the other Klingons go, especially in that first episode, we get some great Gowron bulgy eye moments that are just fantastic. I was watching that the other day with my daughter, who's almost 10, and I said, "What do you think of that Klingon?" And she said, "I do not like the faces he makes." Speaking about Gowron, so that you're not wrong. You are not wrong.
And to go further into Worf's development and his relationship, when they killed Jadzia, sorry folks, spoilers.
For a 30-year-old series, spoilers.
There's still maybe a few who didn't know, who didn't get that far yet. But his reaction, his desire to give her a Klingon send off, one,
Mm-hmm.
and then having to deal with, well, we've got a symbiont that we've got to transplant, and there happens to be somebody passing through who fits the bill, and throwing Esri into the mix, and her kind of fish out of water because all the other crew members had 5.5, 6 years to know each other, and she's just like, "Hey, you're here, great," and then trying to navigate the relationships because Worf was not cool with it's like, it's not Jadzia. How do I
Yeah.
respond to this? And watching how he and she developed a relationship or a friendship outside of we have to work together was kind of nice to see. And watching her character develop and not have to be Jadzia was, watching that very delicate stepping stones that she had to step on to get to being comfortable in her own skin and with who she now was.
Yeah. I feel bad for anyone who's asked to do what that actress was asked to do, to come in and replace. I mean, Jadzia was such a popular character, I think, and Esri was so different.
Hmm.
And I really appreciated that it could have been very easy to be like, okay, now we're going to transplant Dax into Esri, and Worf is going to continue his relationship with her going forward. It could have been very easy for them to do that. I love that they didn't, because that's not how trills work, and that
Hmm.
it would have been disingenuous, and it just wouldn't have worked. And even though that was complicated and messy and hard to watch at times, but at the end, I think I liked Esri just fine. Uh, I like
You resented
Jadzia
her at
probably
first, didn't
better.
you?
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe
Yeah,
not resent.
probably.
Maybe not resent, but you didn't appreciate her at first.
Yeah, she wasn't Jadzia. That's what it really came down to.
No, fair enough.
So I'm not Cisco. I can't look at Dax and just see
The old
my
man.
old friend, old man Curzon. I couldn't look at her and see Jadzia. That was my problem. But that's a me problem, not a her problem.
Quinn?
I like Esri. I think my biggest issue is just whenever the outside, the politics behind the camera, behind the scenes, disrupts a storyline of characters. Like with everything that was going on, like Terry Farrell leaving the show and Jadzia leaving, I appreciate them keeping Dax some
Hmm.
form on the station. I thought they told interesting stories, like Nicole DeBoer. I thought, I mean, Esri was a cutie pie. There were interesting stories, interesting interactions with everybody. In the same way I felt about Worf joining, though, I was like, okay, there are probably 10 Esri episodes in that seventh season that, like, what other stories could have been told, you know? But I would have loved to have seen another, like, 5 years with Esri on the station doing stuff. I thought it was a compelling character still, and I liked what they were doing with her.
Yeah.
Let's see who else. So we've gone into Worf's relationships, and something else that Deep Space Nine did that was glanced on more or less with the Next Generation Era series was families, because we're going to send an exploration ship with everybody's family on it, which seems like a horrible idea, but maybe that's just me. I mean, Starfleet apparently has their own ideas about this. But they talked about it. And we had Beverly and Wesley on the Enterprise. You had Deanna and her relationships with both Will and briefly Worf, Data and Tasha, and Geordi and Hologram of the Week. But this show had actual families. Oh, you also had the O'Briens on the Enterprise, but you got the O'Briens and their children on Deep Space Nine. You had Cisco and Jake, which was one of the most enriching relationships to me on that in that show, because all of them showed how much everybody cared about each other, but it was fun to be able to see Jake and Ben go to the holodeck and go fishing, or play baseball and just have downtime, or the episode where Jake, much to his chagrin, gets trapped on a family trip where Ben's building the spaceship with the solar sail, and Jake's just like, "Shoot me now, please." And just watching how those relationships all developed on the show was fantastic. And the Ben and Jake relationship, I think for me, was epitomized as how complete and real it was in The Visitor, where Cisco gets hit by a warp discharge and disappears into a subspace bubble, and Jake has to live his life without his father, except for brief moments when he phases back into the reality. And Jake spends his life trying to fix what went wrong, because he knows that he's broken by this, and spends his life, he is a successful author. He becomes a successful author and then realizes, I can't do this without my dad. And then tries to save him. And for me, the thing that clinches that episode is the intro, or the return from the last commercial break. And it's just Cisco sitting there staring into the camera with this warm, loving smile on his face, staring at Jake, and Jake's asleep. And it's like, it hit me. It always hits me as a very touching scene, even more so when I became a father. Just like, yes, I know this thing of looking at my kid and going, that's my child. And that look of just pure love that he had there was amazing. And Jake's, explanation to him, like, I figured out how to do this, but you're not going to like it, but this is how it has to happen. And watching, the expressions on both sides of, I'm committed to this, and Ben's like, don't do this. And he's like, clock's ticking, it's already happening. And just the distraught nature of Ben, just like, this isn't what I would have wanted for you. I wanted you to do so much more. He's like, I did everything I wanted to do, and I'm doing this for us, because I can't. There's a 13-year-old boy who needs his dad, and you've got to go back and be there for him. And that episode is one of the probably 3 or 4 out of all of the Star Trek episodes that every time I watch, it's like, okay, where's the tissues? Because it will make me cry every time.
Yeah, that's the next one on my list, or the next one in my rotation coming up is The Visitor. I stopped, right? Like, that's the next one I'm going to watch here in a day or two. So I'm preparing myself emotionally for it.
You kind of have to work up to it.
Yeah. There's a line on Generations where they're on the bridge of the Enterprise B, and Kirk makes the comment about, when did Sulu find time to start a family? And I think Scotty responds to him and says, you always told us if it's important enough, you make the time. And we hear similar stuff from Picard all the time about how he just never had time to sit down and start a family. Not that that's not how a family starts, kids. Talk to your parents. But like we hear that again and again in Star Trek, and that's kind of been the feeling. Like if you want to be a captain, you want to be a CO, you've got to give up that family relationship. And then we see it here with Cisco, and we realize that all the other captains before him just pale in comparison because he's just that much better than everybody else because he was able to do that, balance the stress of running this station that really becomes so strategically important to the Federation, to the Bajorans, to everybody in the Alpha Quadrant, and still manages to be a really good dad. I mean, he doesn't slack
present.
as a dad at all. And I mean, he makes mistakes because we all do, but like he's someone you can look at and be like, I want to strive to be and have a relationship like Jake and Ben Cisco have. Um, and that was so different from anything we had seen from any other captain before. And then on top of that, you have, like you said, the O'Briens, and then you've got like the Ferengi family. You've got Rom and Nog and Quark, and there's a scene in one of the episodes where Quark messes up Nog's exam to get into Starfleet, and Rom is threatening him in the corridor and saying, if you ever do anything to mess with my son's happiness again, I will burn the bar to the ground. And it's like one of the few times where Rom, you can tell his threat is absolutely like he will do it.
Oh yeah.
Nicest guy in the galaxy, but he will burn your bar to the ground if you mess with his kid. And I like those family relationships a lot in DS9.
Yeah, I think the Cisco's. I think the relationship between Jake and is the most important. Start the series with. It's the one you end the series with. But also Ben allowing Jake not to be Starfleet, and like you don't want to be Starfleet. You want to be a writer. You want to be a journalist. You're going to go your own way, and I'll support you with that. And Jake, like I think he's the one that introduces Cassidy Yates and Ben to each other. That he's like you're a different way. I think the Ferengi, Quark and Rom and Nog, similarly, like Nog Starfleet, on the one hand, it like Quark is disgusted by it, but he also loves his nephew and loves his brother and wants him to be happy and successful, even if it's not going to be profitable. They don't pay those Starfleet officers, but
No.
they're going to he's going to support him because it's family, and I think that's the broader message of that part of Deep Space Nine, at least.
And also to take the Cisco family a little further, Ben's relationship with his father is strong.
Yes.
I mean, we see that when Ben has to finally figures out I need to not be here for a while, he goes home to Earth. We learn that he as a cadet at the academy would beam home every night for dinner. It's like, and that relationship shows with let me see, it was Brock Peters who played shoot, what was his name? I can't remember. His father, Joseph Sisko. And just watching their interactions when Joseph showed up on the station or when Ben was on Earth, it's just like it's a great generational relationship that Jake can look back on and have those kinds of memories with his father and his grandfather. And I think that that's something that we definitely never got with the other series. And also, it's something that rings true in African American families, that generational relationship with between father son, grandfather grandson, all up and down the line. And it was something that really hadn't been seen in sci-fi and even in a lot of other media that wasn't black focused media, in especially in mainstream television. So that was also really great to see.
Usually in mainstream television, it's the opposite that's depicted with African American families. That
Exactly,
the
and seeing
father's
it,
not present and there's not that relationship.
and just seeing the bonds there is just like, wow, that's fantastic. That is a great thing, and kudos to Paramount, and I think at the time it was still airing on UPN for carrying that forward and not just kind of going, we're not going to talk about this.
UPN. Kids, that was the Paramount Network, for those of you that never lived through UPN.
Paramount Network before it became Paramount Plus, and you had to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Jake. Yep.
No.
Something else that Deep Space Nine did was give us really rich villains. Not that the other series didn't, but I mean, we got Khan from the original series, we got Moriarty, we got Lore, we got the crystalline entity, we got the Borg from TNG, and also the creatures that tried to overtake the Federation in the conspiracy episode. And I will come back to that in just a moment. But we got rich villains in Deep Space Nine with everybody's favorite Kai Wynn, and she didn't start a villain, but her arc to villainy was amazing. You got the founders, Wayun and the Jem'Hadar in the Dominion. You had the Cardassians. And then, looking at Cardassians, you also have Garrick. Where does he really fall on the line? And they played his arc so well. Just like, is he or isn't he? We don't know. He seems to be okay, but there's something seriously shady going on over here. We just won't look over there too hard. But they gave us so many great villains on this show and took the time to explore them. And I think that was one of the strengths of the show as well, that the others didn't play on as much, but they kind of took it. And I mean, even going into the Dominion War, you have no choice but to look at what's going on with the founders and their cadre. So I liked that they decided this is not bright, shiny, happy Alpha Quadrant. We're out here on the fringes, and it is truly the frontier. Like Kirk was going to explore 100 years before this. We're here again, and we're not just passing through. We are stuck here.
Yeah. I think when I think of Star Trek and I think of villains, I think Q is probably one of the big villains that comes to mind. Whether or not he's a villain, I think he's a villain. And he's Picard's big foil. What I love about Deep Space Nine is they had so many great villains that like they really only had one Q episode because it was like we just don't have time for this. We have too many other things going on, and Cisco didn't have time to mess around with Q
And
because he had
punches
too
them in the
much going
face.
on. Yeah, he's like, yeah. And
which was great. And you never hear about it again. Just like he punches them and we're done here. Okay, that's great.
yeah, because he just doesn't have time for that. I think Kai Wynn is one of the greatest villains ever. I mean, if you think Dolores Umbridge is bad, and she is, Kai Wynn takes it to a whole new level. But what you mentioned, where her character kind of develops that way, we see that a lot with a lot of the characters in Deep Space Nine, whether it's Kai Wynn, Gul Dukat, Garrick, where it's hard to place them exactly black or white on the good to bad spectrum. They sit a lot in the gray.
I would argue that with Dukat was a politician and a soldier, and it's a combination that worked very well for him because he had the Cardassian, politica behind him, but he also had the military might to back up any threat that he made, and would not hesitate to do so. And then, towards the end of the series, where he becomes possessed with, by the power wraiths, and is like, so I just have straight up power. Game on. And but for me, I think that all of them exemplify really well the villain is the hero in their own story, because they all had justifications for what they did and how they did it and how they went about it. but from the Federation perspective, which the audience is sitting here, sitting through, yeah, they are they're the bad guys.
I
Anybody?
agree, Robert. Yeah, I agree. I
Just like,
I think the only exception to me, like, because we
Well,
get
and
a
that,
lot of sympathetic. Go ahead, Quinn.
well, I think the you can only get villains that complex if you have that much time to develop them, and I
yes,
think sitting with Kai Wynn, not just in like a two-part episode, but over the space of years, you see, yeah, she does want what's best for Bajor, but she also craves power, and she doesn't leave, but she will also give up those beliefs for more power. And I think taking the time to get to know those characters just benefits. And so having this Star Trek be stationary in every sense of the word, you benefit from that. And I really value that, because then when you do lose somebody, it is a true loss. And uh, the the that might not have been a year are they have flourished, they've blossomed.
Yeah, yeah. I think the stationary piece plays a huge piece in that because, in other Star Trek shows, when they come across a bad villain, it's like, well, that was scary. Glad we'll never see that guy again. And then it's move on to the next planet and the next
Right.
whatever that they're gonna have to face. But yeah, like Kai Wynn was awful, but they had to figure out a way to work with her on stuff because she was a spiritual leader on Bajor, and that had a huge influence on the politics. And Garrick, was he good? Was he bad? But he was on the station, and they had to figure out a way how, to get along with him and work with him, and because these characters didn't go away,
yeah.
and so they had to figure out a way to coexist in some way. Um, and that time and that development really pays off.
I would
Which
do want to
is
touch.
another reflection of our real world.
Yeah,
Whether
Yep.
it's politics or coworkers or family members, you need to find a way to cope. And there are going to be
yeah.
weeks that are not wins. And win, like Kai win.
But I'm ching.
Never mind. That just that just fell apart. But it's yeah, it's the most real world of the Star Treks, and that's something I just love about it.
And using that as a great jumping off point for real world, they also touched on something over an arc that other episodes may have hinted at. Other series may have hinted at here and there. They actually went into mental health. Um,
Mm,
and their entry point for that was Nog, after he lost his leg, comes back to DS9. He's kind of unfocused and unsure of what to do. And granted, I'm sure that there was a counselor on there before Esri that he could have talked to, but he retreated into a comfortable space for him, which was Vic's lounge, in the Hollow Suite, and actually got good advice from Vic about how to move forward. But science fiction shows don't talk about your mental health. They don't talk about what's the best thing for you to do, whether it's stay in Starfleet, don't stay in Starfleet, do something. It was unheard of. And the fact that in this would have been what, early 2000s, maybe 2001, that they're putting it in the forefront and showing Nog has actual trauma that he's dealing with. Ben had trauma that he just kind of plowed through over the series. But some of these characters were just not well. Especially in looking at it today, and when we're so adamant about self-care and taking time for you making sure that you're getting time with your family. For this, literally 30 years ago, or 26 years ago at that point, it was huge, and that's also kind of risky at that point. Quinn, you have the floor.
I think that yeah, showing how the characters cope with loss. I think you could say the same thing with watching Worf deal with Jed's death, dealing with
Yes.
loss like that. I think there were some stories where where Ben ends up on Earth in 1840s as a science fiction magazine writer.
1950s, Far Beyond the Stars, one of my other favorite episodes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, and that plays into obviously the civil rights and racism, but also mental health there as well. I think there were a lot of stories that were like, okay, going through war is going to put these guys through the ringer, and it's gonna be pleasant. It's not always just pew pew and
Mm-hmm.
a cloaking device and you move on. It's like that eventually catches up with you.
Yeah, and I think we see it. We see it a little bit with O'Brien and the way he feels towards Cardassians because of experiences that he's had as an enlisted man and some of the operations he was part of. I think we see the difference in how the show approaches it, which is pretty progressive and forward thinking for its time, in the way Cisco approaches Worf when he's talking to him about staying on the station. 4 years previous, we have Picard talking to Cisco about whether or not he's going to give up his commission, and Picard's kind of like, just suck it up, man. Like, your Starfleet, suck it up. This is your assignment, do it. And then when Cisco has that same conversation with Worf, it's very much like, look, I was going through something. This is something that happened to me. You've got to decide for yourself. And it was much more of an open conversation about, you know, loss and dealing with it and moving forward and things like that. And I think that was the style that Deep Space Nine had with a lot of that stuff, was much more open, much more communicative, talking very openly about it. And that's huge difference for what we had seen in sci-fi up to that point, and probably still do see in large part.
I think we see a little more now because I think that show writers are trying to address real world topics in their shows more often now. So I think that we do see a little more now than we did even 30 years ago, and definitely before that. It was always, suck it up before that. I mean, Kirk would have never gone to talk to somebody. Picard kept everything very close to the vest. And I think that starting there and, moving forward with subsequent series, you see where there are many characters, not all, are more willing to discuss what's going on in their heads and get it out somehow. And one that I forgot to mention was Kira dealing with the loss of Bareil,
Mhm.
and then having
Bareil.
to deal with a mirror Bareil and a mirror Kira again, and having to kind of reopen that wound. And it's like watching her, that was difficult for how difficult that was for her. Also losing faith literally in Kai Wynn as she's the spiritual leader of Bajor, and Kira, who was always shown to be very devout in her faith, and to have the person who is the head of Bajor's religion turned into a very horrific person was hard for her.
There were a lot of Mirror Universe episodes since you mentioned it. I just think about, there's a lot of Mirror Universe episodes in Deep Space Nine.
But it was interesting, the way that they played the mirror universe of DS9 was kind of fun to see, and watching Ben deal with Jennifer's alive here, but we never got
Mhm.
married. Watching that divergence was fun. Seeing that not everybody was quite as good or bad as we thought of them previously. And like we said, what would Kai Wynn be like in the mirror universe?
Yeah, a decent person.
A decent person.
It would be weird.
I think that really, I I find that the show has so many things to offer, even today, that you can go back and look at. Um, Quinn mentioned, the Far Beyond the Stars episode. We've talked about, relationships, but not just family, but found family, and how the group uh, became not just a crew and not just a Federation and Bajoran crew, but a family unit together. And I recently finished a book set in the DS9 future called Unity. And it's, Ben is still in the wormhole, Cassidy is still pregnant, Jake has been gone for a number of years, and Jake returns, and they're just trying to the card. Sorry, there's something going on with the Federation that Deep Space Nine is aware of but won't talk much about, and everybody's very tight-lipped. The Federation is extremely tight-knit, and this is coming back to what I said earlier about conspiracy. The aliens that appeared in conspiracy are back, and they're back with a vengeance. And they show up in a couple of different places, but they show up in a big way on Bajor. And I will just leave it at that because I don't want to spoil anything. It's actually a pretty fast read and a interesting look at what could have been. I don't know if it's considered apocrypha now or if they've decided we'll just let it ride. But it for me fulfilled an itch that I haven't had scratched in a number of years for that universe and that setting. So if you've not read it, I recommend it. Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Unity.
Well, and if you're watching Picard, the third season now, it ties in a little bit with Deep Space Nine. And I don't want to say more than that for those that haven't seen it, but
well, you also get a Deep Space Nine tie-in with Lower Decks as well.
Yep.
And that was fun to see and hear characters from DS9 show up somewhat unexpectedly. You didn't know who you were going to get, and it was just a fun, foray back into a warm, fuzzy spot in space on the other side of the galaxy.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see more of what's happening now, or I guess in the 25th century on Deep Space Nine.
More of what's happening now, 500 years in the future.
Yeah,
400 years. Yeah.
Time travel, go figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we've touched on a lot, and I know that we've hit the hour mark, and I apologize again for disappearing for so long. I have to get a Chief O'Brien on that. But I think we've covered a lot of great ground, and I think that we've shown what Deep Space Nine has meant to each of us in different ways. And I could easily go on for another hour and a half, 2 hours, 10 days talking about it, because it's just so much to mine from in that series, and so much left. Like there was a movie that came out, what we left behind, that kind of talked about what the showrunners might have done had they continued beyond the seventh season. And it's a show that I think got maybe not a bad rap, but definitely not a fair shake by a lot of people, by a lot of diehard Trek fans when it came out. I think that it is a very worthwhile successor to the original series and Next Generation, and lead into everything that came after. One of the most direct links you can have or look at is Discovery, where you start again with a non-captain character and watch their progression through their adversity and a number of external challenges that lead to decisions that are not easy for anybody. Even with Prodigy, which I think if you have young children, you like to get them into Star Trek, I think that's a great gateway. It ties in a little more to Voyager than to the other series, but it's the same family, the same universe, and it's fun. I've enjoyed watching it with my daughters.
I only start with the first series when I'm introducing my kids to it, the original series, because I
The
just,
animated series.
no, the original series, all the misogyny and issues, like that's where I want to start with my kids when we start Star Trek.
Start them off right.
And then I just tell them it only gets better from here, guys. It only gets better from here. Sorry. Sorry, I took us off track there, Robert. I apologize. That's on me.
That's okay. No, what I wanted to say is there's so much richness in Deep Space Nine that we started to get with TNG, because the original series was definitely episode of the week, and they were shown in an order that didn't really matter. You could catch any episode, and if you just ignore the star date, any episode could follow any other in the original series. They went more episodic and story arc with Next Generation, and this one you were definitely, if you missed episodes in this one, it kind of hurt because you did miss certain things that paid off later in that season that were definitely further down the road. So it changed Trek in that way as well. It wasn't Gene Roddenberry's bright, shiny Federation. It was the tail end of space on a old busted former prison colony. That it's like, okay, well, here we are. This is what we got. We got that thing over there that's flying around in space. We should probably go explore that at some point. And I think that also allowed them to get the fans who were like, well, they're just stuck in one place, to assuage them a little bit, to go, "Yeah, we got a bigger ship. It's a battleship, and we can go different spots now, or the longer range runabouts can go a little further out." And yeah, I mean, all of those things together, and so many more things are what I think makes Deep Space Nine such a great show, worthy of a lot more attention than it got. I am happy to see that more people have come to it since it has gone off the air and have appreciated it more. And I, think that it deserves every bit of that appreciation and attention that it's now getting.
Yeah, I totally agree. Deep Space Nine was the first Star Trek series that I sat down and watched with my wife. When she found out I was into Star Trek, I hid it from her for a number of years, and then she found out my deep dark secret. And I, that was the series that I thought if I was going to start her anywhere, that's where I want to start because I felt like the characters were just more grounded. Um, and you could buy into their stories a little bit more than in some of the other series. And it was one that we watched pretty faithfully until we got through the whole series. Usually one or two episodes a night, um, and that was a great shared experience. That and other things has always made me feel that Deep Space Nine is my Star Trek series that I go back to frequently and watch from start to finish and just enjoy. And every time I'd pick up new things or remember things that I've forgotten uh, and put different pieces together, it's just to me, it's one of those series that just really stands the test of time. I mean, even 30 years later, watching it, it doesn't feel to me like it's an old series. My kids probably disagree, but it doesn't feel like an old series to me.
Quinn, anything?
Yeah, I love it. It's usually my favorite Star Trek, and I think if Star Trek is about examining the human experience, I think that Star Trek does that, or Deep Space Nine does that in more ways than most of the other Treks, and I think does it more completely. Um, my oldest son, his name is Miles Benjamin, and it's like he's not named after certain characters, but those characters never did anything to make me not name him after them, is how I'll say it. So
Excellent.
I love those characters of that station. Love the Defiant. It's my favorite hero ship. Like just fantastic series. And more fun than it gets credit for. It's not dour all the time. It's a fun
It's
show.
not. And I think that for a show that did start off a little heavier than most Star Trek series start off, with the possible exception of Voyager, um, it has episodes that are lighter and are uplifting. It's not always, we're in the middle of hell. That's not what it's about. Even in the middle of the Dominion War, I think that they showed that life goes on. There, you can still find joy in things, even in the middle of, wow, I'm going to go there, trials and tribulations, which is also a great episode. I regret nothing.
That
Uh,
that is one of my favorite moments in Star Trek, in Trials and Tribulations, when they ask Worf about the whole Klingon
yeah,
thing going on. He's like, "Yeah, we don't
we don't
talk about it."
that. And I think that if you want to get a look at an episode and it ties in so well with both Deep Space Nine and the original series, start there and just kind of, if you're a fan of the original series, this is a great kind of look at both worlds at the same time. But if you've not watched Deep Space Nine, do yourself a favor, give it a shot, and know that it does suffer from something that many other series fall prey to: people getting used to their characters for the first season or season and a half. There's a fair bit of that that goes on with Deep Space Nine in the first season, definitely. I think that by the time they hit late first season, early second season, people had a much firmer lock on who their characters were, and that all the character growth that we talked about earlier just blossoms out of that going forward from there.
It's true. Kira's extra shouty in the first season. Like,
Yes,
she's
yes.
just angry all the time,
But I mean, so
and
was
she
Odo,
gets
for that
much,
matter.
much better.
I mean,
Yeah,
Odo was too. Odo quieted down a little bit, but he still had his
yeah,
little quark. But
yeah.
we didn't even touch on him, and he's another fabulous part of that puzzle for Deep Space Nine. And I wish I'd spent a little more time talking about him earlier, because
Yeah.
he ties into so much on that show in so many ways and becomes vital, especially towards second, the middle third and second third of the series.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's not a character though on the show that I think, yeah, I could do without that character. Even minor characters, I have a hard time. I mean, Quarks wouldn't be the same without Morn. He doesn't
No, it
say
would not.
anything, but it wouldn't be the same.
It would not. And I think that I think that everybody got their chance to shine. Going to Quinn's, 10 episodes of X. I think that everybody over the course of 7 seasons had enough time to develop, to have key episodes and to shine. Even some of the lesser members of the ensemble. And you got to know them all very well in that time.
Yeah,
And I don't
for
think that
sure.
anyone was left lacking in that regard.
No.
Well,
Okay.
and more than we ever got to know about Geordi or Beverly or even Will Riker.
Hmm.
We know so much about Picard and Data and Worf, and then everybody else, secondary.
True.
But
True.
those secondary characters on Deep Space, we got to know them.
Yeah.
And care about them. I mean,
Yeah.
by the end of the series, you actually do care about what happens to these people. What are they going through? What have they gone through?
Yeah. I mean, when you can get an episode where it's Odo and Quark stuck on a planet and you care about what happens to both of them, and like, it's one of my favorite episodes.
Hmm.
And at the beginning of the show, I'd say, yeah, those aren't two of my favorite characters, but by that point, yeah, they are, and I love them. So I agree.
Well, rather than prattle on for another umpteen hours just about our favorite Star Trek, we should probably wrap it here. Jake, thank you for taking over in my absence. We'll have to figure out what the heck is going on with my system now. Quinn, thank you so much for bringing your insight and input to the show.
Thank you.
Jake, you can point out any of the Age of Geek media that needs to be pointed out.
Yeah, for sure. You can find us on Discord, discord.com/Age of Geek Media. You can also find us at ageofgeek.com and wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, subscribe, please, to our YouTube channel so you'll never miss an episode. And we greatly appreciate your support.
And thank you very much for joining our podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
This has been an Age of Geek media production.